Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 306 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy here with David Park, and our guest on tonight's show is Chris Feistl. Chris served 26 years, if I recall correctly, in the DEA, and many of you may remember his character in Narcos, the season about the Cali Cartel. We're going to talk to him all about that in just a moment. First, I just want to tell you guys about one of our sponsors, Ketone IQ. Ketone IQ is a clean shot of energy with no sugar or caffeine. I used this recently on a trip to Central Asia where I was super jet lagged, but also wanting to go and do things outdoors, backpacking and horseback riding and everything else. And I threw a box of these in my backpack and took them with me. So there's the original Ketone IQ, and then there's this one, peach flavored, that actually does have 100 milligrams of natural caffeine in it derived from green tea. But the main thing about this energy drink is that the ketones in it help oxygenate the red blood cells. So this thing was developed in conjunction with the special operations community, especially for the mountain teams, the guys who work at high altitude, to keep them going. So I had a good experience with it, and I still use it, day to day. And then they also have top pro athlete partnerships. They work with top Olympic athletes like Des Linden and Michael Andrews and Ironman world champion Sam Laidlaw. They just launched a supplement and research partnership with Team Visma Lisa Bike, the top pro cycling team in the world, winning the last two Tour de France's in 2023 and 2022, and swept all three Grand Tours this past year. Ketone also has, for those of you who are active and on the go, you prefer the pouch that you can just put into your gear and then drink on the go. They have these also. So please go and check them out. You can save 30% off your first subscription order and receive a free 6-pack of Ketone IQ by going to the URL ketone.com/teamhouse. So again, that's ketone, ketone.com/teamhouse. And the other thing I want to tell you guys about is some shameless self-promotion. My book, We Defy, The Lost Chapters of Special Forces History, is coming out in December. December 9th. It's up for pre-order now on Amazon. And this book was about 10 years in the making, probably 100 interviews at least involved in this with primary sources. Covers the Backpack Nuclear Weapon Program, Green Light. It covers America's first counterterrorism unit, Blue Light. Det A, the guys that were undercover in Berlin, and Det K, the liaisons, special forces liaisons that we have in Korea. So, book's coming out December 9th. Please go check it out. So, with that said, Chris, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you guys.
So, Chris, as we, our traditional question here, we ask our guests about their origin story. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how that took you towards law enforcement.
Well, I was born in Newark, New Jersey, grew up in 44, Pennsylvania, which is a small town, about an hour and 45 minutes northeast of Philadelphia. Went to high school there, played basketball and track. Went into college, majored in criminal justice and government. While I was in college, I also played basketball in college too. Started for 4 years in college. Did an internship as a seasonal police officer in Wildwood, New Jersey, back in 1984, 85, and 86. And that was what kind of got me on the path to being in law enforcement. I originally wanted to go to law school. I wanted to be like a sports agent. And so during the summer, when I was doing this internship, I had a chance to work undercover. And I was 20 or 21 years old at the time.
They let an intern do undercover work?
Well, things were a lot different back then. I mean, but check this out, man. This is pretty cool. So we did a 1 week training through their like this abbreviated academy. They gave us a gun. We were driving around in police cars 1 week, and we were out there, either walking a beat or driving in the car and responding to calls and doing stuff. And I remember even looking back at that then and thinking, like, how the hell can they let 20, 21-year-old kids carry guns and go out and arrest people? It was crazy. But I was in a bar. Wasn't an unusual occurrence for me back then or even now. But and I met this girl and we got talking, and we set up this deal. She wanted to sell methamphetamine. So I ended up doing this undercover on the boardwalk. And I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. And then I started looking into DEA, FBI, CIA, different things. And I applied to DEA, and a year and a half, 2 years later, it was more than that. It was a couple of years later that I got hired.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you went from that sort of like internship relationship applying for federal law enforcement.
Correct. So
yeah.
It was my junior year summer of my junior year in college, I think. So I did it in my junior year, and then the summer after I graduated, and then the summer after that. But in the meantime, I had been applying for different jobs. So in 1986, I got hired by the Virginia Beach Police Department. So I just kept working my way further south down the beach, and I worked there for about a year and a half, and then finally DEA called me in early 1988, and that's when I jumped to federal.
So at that point, was your kind of like first landing, I guess, with DEA, was that Miami?
Yeah, so I got hired out of Norfolk, Virginia, which is, bordered Virginia Beach. And I went to the FBI Academy up in Quantico, Virginia back then it was 13 weeks. And then my first permanent assignment out of the academy was Miami, Florida. I got there in summer of 1988.
So Miami, 1988, is kind of the height of the whole cocaine cowboys thing that is going on down there. I mean, what was that like as a young DEA agent?
Well, I mean, for me and for a lot of others, that was the place to be, right? Everybody
Right.
was watching Miami Vice, and Sonny Crockett and Tubbs are running around Miami in these nice cars. Like, dude, this is, you want to be a DA agent, you got to go to Miami. So yeah, we got there, and we always used to joke around. It's like, hey man, cocaine is like falling out of the sky, and literally it was.
Literally.
I mean, there was so much, Colombian cocaine there at the time, but it was a great place to get started. It was a great place to learn the job. I always look back and said that, guys who went to big offices like LA, Miami, New York out of the academy, especially back then in the 80s, you were kind of light years ahead of everybody else because you just got exposed to so many different kinds of cases there. And, Miami too, you were traveling all the time. We were in the Caribbean, we were in Central America, you were in South America following up on cases or, pursuing leads, meeting with assets. So for me, that was the place to be in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been super exciting to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun. I mean, you were always busy. You were doing, a couple different deals a day. You were doing large scale transportation cases, wiretaps, conspiracy cases. So there was no shortage of work back then in Miami.
From that time period, your rookie days with DEA, any like interesting stories or things that stick out in your mind from that time period?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stories. I don't know how many I can get into here without really getting people in trouble or doing stuff. But it was, it's kind of like what you always saw on television stuff. It was pretty much the Wild West. I mean, it was wide open. Everybody was out running and gunning. And, I always used to tell people too that, from the time I got out of the academy until the time I went to Colombia, which is a little story there we can get to later, but I didn't get a haircut. So I didn't get a haircut for basically 6 years. I had, the ends trimmed and cleaned it up, but so, after 5, 6 years, I had hair, all the way down to the middle of my back. and it was the typical Miami Vice days, with the earrings and the chains and driving around in a Mercedes and just every day was, I mean, it was really, really fun to go to work back then.
And it sounds like you're doing a lot of drug buys.
Yeah, we did a lot of undercover in Miami from, did a lot of street level deals, helping out some of the PDs like Coral Gables, Broward County Sheriff's Office, but we also did a lot of international stuff too. I used to pose as a boat handler, that
Oh
we
yeah.
had like a 37-foot Midnight Express that we would use to transport. We had an undercover house in the Florida Keys, uh, so we did a lot of transportation cases where we were meeting people in different countries, providing the transportation for some of the cartels to bring, cocaine and marijuana in. So it was a good time. You got a lot of travel and a lot of good experience.
What was the like? Yeah, I mean, I know that you were a junior guy at this time, but what was your sense of like the DEA's strategy in the war on drugs at that time? Was it really just to take the drugs off the street by nabbing these big, making these big drug busts?
Yeah, well, DEA, I mean, they always would refer to DEA as going after the biggest and the baddest drug traffickers on the planet. So we tried to focus on, large scale organizations or, top level groups that were distributing, cocaine, heroin, marijuana, whatever. And we didn't just try to arrest those people. We tried to knock out the whole organization because, even today, if you take out one guy, somebody else is going to step
Sure.
right up and take their place. But if you can knock out the whole organization, cripple them, take their money, arrest everybody, you're making an impact. So, back then, you know, the Caribbean was the main entry point of cocaine into the United States. Carlos later established Norman's Cay there, which they portray in Blow, some of the movies, and in Narcos too. And that just inundated Florida and the East Coast with cocaine. So uh, you were always trying to target those transportation cells, the money laundering cells, and try to knock out, that entire organization.
I don't want to gloss over. You mentioned an interesting case, Operation Millennium. Was that around this time frame?
Operation Millennium was in 1999,
Oh, okay. We're
and
jumping forward then.
yeah, yeah, that's forward, but we can talk about it now
Okay.
or later. I mean, just briefly, it was kind of a joint operation that we did with the Colombian National Police and some other U.S. intelligence agencies, and it was a really significant case back in the day because we ultimately indicted, I think, 44 people and extradited, almost 40 people from Colombia, including Fabio Ochoa, who's actually still in prison on that case, who was one of the founders or one of the main people of the Ochoa clan and the Medellin cartel. So again, Colombia, again, no shortage of cases and high level cartels to work.
I have heard some like interesting stories about these extradition cases where, and I want to hear your perspective, if any of this sounds true or not, that, oftentimes the person that's being indicted is kind of like ready to get out of the game, and we will send a government representative down there to Colombia to meet with their lawyers. And then the thing is that they all want to surrender in Panama because Panama has no death penalty built into their extradition treaty. Can you like, do you have any recollections about that process and how that works?
Well, I mean, what you're talking about, it has happened a few times. A lot of times, people who are indicted in Colombia, they'll go to Panama or an adjoining country there, just so they don't have to go through the extradition process. Because if you get arrested in Colombia, or say you even surrender to authorities and you're going through the extradition process, you're going to sit in a Colombian prison for,
Mm.
when extradition first started, it was reinstituted in 1997 for crimes committed after December 17th, 1997. So in all essence, it didn't really take place until 1998. But so a lot of guys would go to Panama so that they wouldn't have to sit in prison for a year. They would surrender, and we would get them on a plane, or they would make their own arrangements. We would get them to the U.S., and boom, here they are. They can start cooperating. They can do whatever they needed to do. But it's in in Colombia, and I think in pretty much every country, there is no death penalty. There are provisions that are incorporated into the extradition treaties with these countries. That most of them is that you can't serve more than 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You
yeah.
can, but it's unusual that you're going to see somebody sentenced to more than 30 years. So, and also part of the extradition requirement for like Colombia, for them to agree to extradite a Colombian national, they can't get the death penalty. That's off the table. So, in essence, the max, for lack of a better term, would say 30 years. The maximum sentence they're going to get is 30 years. So, there is no death penalty. Otherwise, they wouldn't allow their citizens to be extradited.
That's, I mean, I mean, regardless of what your thoughts are about the death penalty per se, I mean, it is pretty wild that you can be a drug lord and the maximum sentence you get is 30 years. I mean, not just an international drug lord, but all of the things that come along with that, the money laundering to the executions, right?
Yep. So to use your example, now there have been several cases, I can think of several off the top of my head without mentioning names, where traffickers did go to Panama and they negotiated or they surrendered and they got ultimately extradited to the U.S. But it's if major traffickers were smart like that and they knew that they were going to at some point be extradited to the States. A lot of them think they're never going to get caught, so they don't do this. But you could quietly, and you use your example, go to Panama,
Mm-hmm.
quietly, have your attorneys get with DEA or FBI or whatever, surrender, get extradited, come here to the States, have your little surrogates on the ground, cooperate, and, depending on how you do it, people might not even know you're even in custody. In the whole time you've surrendered, you're cooperating, you're cutting a deal, and you're lowering that potential 30-year sentence, quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, maybe running a car dealership in Albuquerque a year later, right?
Yeah, well, it's been known to happen.
So in your case, Operation Millennium, how did that sort of go down? I mean, I think you said you extradited 40 people on that one.
Yeah, it was that was kind of like an old school mafia uh, show. So you can imagine there was a place in Bogota that these traffickers used to go to, and these were like the highest level traffickers anywhere. I mean, these were like the biggest of the biggest. Fabio Ochoa, Diego Montoya, you know, many like really, really high level guys. And they would go to this apartment and they would just sit around in there and talk all day long about doing this load and doing that load and sending cocaine here and money coming back there. So we were able to, without getting into too much detail, we were able to kind of get bugs, listening devices into that place. So we were hearing everything that these guys were talking about. And it was really remarkable to hear, the amount of cocaine that these guys were smuggling, where they were sending it, how they were concealing it. And we used all that evidence, which we had judicialized with the Colombian National Police there. And we ended up indicting, I think it was 44 of the biggest traffickers in Colombia at the time, and most of them got extradited. There was one or two in Mexico, but yeah, most of them got arrested, if not all of them at some point, and they all got extradited.
So let's start to talk about, you had told me that you spent 12 years in Colombia. Tell us about your first assignment getting sent down there, and at what point does the Cali Cartel start to come up onto your radar?
Well, I mean, the Cali Cartel and the Medellin Cartel come up on your radar the day you step foot in Miami in 1988, because those were the two cartels that were dominating the cocaine trade back then. I mean, they were pretty much the only game in town. They, without exaggerating, they were responsible probably for 100% of the cocaine coming out of Colombia into the U.S. between both of those cartels. Um, so the minute you got there, you knew who the Cali Cartel and the Medellin Cartel were. And I had worked on several transportation cases, maritime smuggling cases, where we were targeting, kind of mid-level lieutenants or transportation coordinators for both the Cali and Medellin cartel. So I had a pretty decent background on who Cali was, who Medellin was. I had got there. Well, yeah, Escobar was still alive in '88. So they were, we were targeting those guys. So when I got out of the academy, like I said, to be a DEA agent, to me, there was only one place to go, and that was Miami. So after 6 years of working in Miami and targeting some of these cartels, I said, well, if I really want to be a DEA agent, I gotta go to Colombia. I mean, I gotta get in the shit. I gotta get down there and start working against the Cali and Medellin cartel. And by that time, Escobar had been killed. So I was selected to go to Colombia, and I started working on the Cali cartel with my partner Dave Mitchell. But funny story, just trying to get into Colombia. I had applied probably in mid '93 to go down to Colombia, and I'll take you back to when I said about the long hair and the earrings and everything. And I had applied, and the first selection came out. I didn't get selected. I was like, how the hell can I not get selected? I mean, worked on the Cali targets. I know all the players. I speak a little bit of Spanish. You had good evaluations, everything. And then I called down to Steve Murphy. He's one of the agents in Narcos season 1 and season 2, him and Javier Pena. And I said, Murph, how can I not get selected? He's like, hey, man, Joe Toft, who was the country attaché there, he's like, hey, Toft runs a tight ship. I'm paraphrasing here. So he runs a tight ship. He's probably afraid you're going to roll into the embassy with your board shorts, your flip flops, and a surfboard on your shoulder. And, you got to get that haircut, bro. You got to clean it up a little bit. So I was like, shit, it's 6 years I had my hair. By that time, it was like, it was about 5.5 years. So I went out at lunch one day, and I just got my hair cut. They lopped off like a good foot my hair. And I walked back into the DEA office, and like the secretary, people were looking at me like, dude, did you have like a breakdown? I mean, what happened? Why'd you get your hair cut? And I'm like, I don't really know. I was like in shock. And about a week later, I got a call from Joe Toft, and he said, hey, I heard you got your hair cut. And I said, yes, sir, I did. Shows you, and I want to come to Colombia. I want to work. He goes, yeah, don't worry about it. Things will work out for you. And then I finally got selected on the next go around and ended up in Colombia. So, I had to cut my hair to go to Colombia, man.
Holy shit. Well, I was going to say maybe the reason was because you look maybe even more Irish than I do, and that could be a bit of a problem down there.
Well, and it's funny you say that because, and here's another story too, is that when we got selected, we had a lot of the supervisors in Miami and in headquarters, and even some of our friends were like, dude, how the hell are you guys, and I'm like 6'2", 6'2.5". Mitchell was my partner. He's like 6'3". He's like, dude, how the hell are you guys going to work in Cali? You can't blend in there. You guys stick out like a sore thumb. You're not going to be able to blend in. And we said, hey, we'll figure it out. We'll make it happen. And when I first got to Colombia, like the first day, and I talked to my boss, who was Ruben Prieto at the time, and I said, like, hey, when can we go to Cali? I got some leads I got to follow up on. We had some pretty good assets that we were working in Miami that, had direct contact with the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, two of the founders, the heads of the Cali Cartel. And he said, hey, well, we're not sending anybody to Cali right now. I'm like, what do you mean? I mean, how can we investigate the Cali Cartel if we can't go to Cali? It's like, well, you're going to have to do it from Bogota. Like, what kind of strategy is that? That's like the craziest thing I've ever heard. And he said, well, we're not sending anybody to Cali right now because it's too dangerous. Why is it so dangerous? I mean, I knew why, but I'm like, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we had two like veteran Hispanic agents who were working over there before we got there, and they had their photo taken while they were there. And they were coming out of, I think it was out of it's coming out of an office building. And the photograph made its way back to the embassy. where the ambassador saw it, DEA saw it, and it was perceived as like an implied threat that, hey, and the person who brought it in said, look, these guys in this photo are DEA agents, which they were. It's a pretty good photo, actually. And he said the cartel knows where they stay, they know where they eat, they know where they rent their cars, they know everything about them. So when DEA heard that, they were like, that's it. The embassy, said nobody else is going to Cali until this thing kind of passes over, or until we deem it's safe to go back. So that was my like welcome to Colombia when I got there, all excited to go to Cali and work on the Cali Cartel. And they said, nope, you can't go. It's too dangerous. Besides, you don't blend in.
Did you have any sense of the U.S. military presence? Because I know JSOC had guys down there doing like surveillance and working with the Colombian police, I believe.
Yeah, they were there. They had a pretty good presence there. They were also there because there were several U.S. citizens who were taken hostage by the FARC, which was one of the guerrilla groups that was operating down there. And they were down there a lot, advising them, training some of the like their equivalent of like HRT teams. There were also a couple big bases there, Appiai and a couple other Tolemaida, where you had some U.S. military forces there that again doing training and a lot of different stuff, which I don't want to get into too much what the military was doing there, but that was basically it. But yeah, they had a pretty large presence there.
Go check out our previous interview years ago with George Hand, who was one of the operators down there. You guys will enjoy that one. We got to give another shout out to our sponsors. Dave, do you want to tell them about GhostBed?
I would love to tell them about GhostBed. Hey, if you sleep hot at night, you know just how disruptive it can be. Whether you're having trouble falling asleep, you're waking up sweating in the middle of the night, or all of the above. That's where GhostBed can come in. As the makers of the coolest bed in the world, GhostBed is your go-to for cooling mattresses, cooling pillows, and even cooling bedding. From their signature Ghost Ice fabric to patented technology that adjusts with your body temperature. Every GhostBed mattress is designed with cooling in mind. So whether you want a plusher mattress that cushions your shoulders and hips, or a firmer option with exceptional support, your GhostBed will keep you cool and comfortable all night long. When you purchase a GhostBed mattress, your comfort is guaranteed. You can try out our mattress for 101 nights risk-free and make sure it's the right fit for you. Plus, they offer free shipping and most items ship within 24 hours. If you're not sure which GhostBed is for you, check out their mattress quiz. You'll answer a few questions and get your personalized recommendation, or reach out to their friendly service team of sleep experts for all the help you need. And even if you're not in the market for a mattress right now, definitely check out their Ghost pillows. I think they're amazing. They have gel memory foam pillows, which are very comfortable and nice and cooling, so you don't wake up with super sweaty pillows. Even better, Team House listeners can get 50% site-wide for a limited time. Just visit ghostbed.com/house and use code HOUSE at checkout. Again, that's ghostbed.com/house with the code HOUSE at checkout to save a whopping 50% off site-wide.
And? There's another one that I have to do. Yes. Sorry.
That's okay.
It's live. Yeah, it's live. This is live streaming, so, you get to see these little hiccups. 1 second, guys.
I can get it.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
With the upcoming U.S. election, it's a pivotal moment for our country, and we've all got a responsibility to get out and vote. But there is another way to support your side before you even get to the polling station. Right now, you can back your candidate with a bet and win when they win. It's a trend amongst voters that is exploding in popularity, and we're getting it in on it at MyBookie. Honestly, could there be anything more American than putting your dollars behind your vote? Probably not. Show your confidence with a straight bet on the winner of the election and choose from all kinds of fun prop wagers like what color tie will Trump wear? Spoiler alert, it's red. It's always red. The betting market for politics has a proven track record with the favorite to win in 4 of the last 6 elections, all cashing on the day of. Donald Trump opened as the favorite for MyBookie in 2016, and he again opened as the favorite this year. Harris currently has a slight advantage, but that can easily change with voters laying their bets. Listen, I can't tell you who will win the 2024 election for certain. What I can tell you is that I'll be putting money on my side, and with a book, we trust. Don't miss out on this support. Don't miss out on this. Support your side. Use promo code TEAMHOUSE to double your first deposit and instantly start with a leg up, but only with MyBookie.
So, Chris, back to you. Your first trip down to Colombia, you kind of laid a bit of the groundwork of what the situation was like when you arrived. What did I guess the DEA is ultimately working for the ambassador down there, right? I mean, what was sort of your mission when you arrived?
Yeah, so it's a good thing to bring out because a lot of people probably don't realize is that, when you're overseas, the ambassador is the king. He is the law, and what he says goes. So he pretty much dictates what we can do and what we can't do. So, yeah, I mean, we get there, and because of his what happened with the photograph and his determination in conjunction with DEA is that we can't go to Cali. So we're busy photocopying a lot of documents from seized raids. We're doing this. I'm talking up offices and trying to get sources and get some information. So me and my partner Dave, we just keep prodding like, hey, we have to go to Cali. We have to go to Cali. And like I said, we had one good asset who was meeting directly with Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez, the heads of the Cali Cartel in Cali. So I said, look, we got a couple locations we got to follow up on. We can't investigate the Cali Cartel from the embassy. So after, a week or 10 days or 2 weeks of coaxing, we were finally able to go to Cali. But this is what they tell us. They said, okay, we're going to approve you guys to go to Cali. We're going to start sending people back, but you can't leave the base without an escort. You must be accompanied by, police or military officials at all times. We had to be back by nightfall, right? We couldn't even spend the night. We had to fly over, try and establish liaison with the police and the military, and then fly back that night. And then, of course, we got the whole, DEA, no cowboy shit, no unilateral action. The Mansfield Amendment prohibits you from participating in arrests in a foreign country. So the whole 9 yards. So our first trip to Cali was a day trip where we met with the colonel in charge of the military search block, who was in charge of going after the Cali Cartel. And we also met with the police colonel who was in charge of the police search block. So there were two independent, search block forces going after the Cali Cartel.
That must have been difficult to navigate. I mean, because you have two different units with the same mission. That always results in some sort of tension.
It does, but it was kind of an all hands on deck approach. Even on the U.S. side, the CIA was involved, we were involved, everybody was on board, and the agency had more of a relationship with the military. And because of what happened with Pablo Escobar, the police, and we worked very closely with we meaning DEA, with the police to take down Escobar. So we kind of started to drift a little bit away from the military and establish liaison and a working relationship with the police, the police search block. But as we soon found out, they were heavily infiltrated by the Cali Cartel, and our main liaison, who was a captain at the search block, was one of the Cali Cartel's most coveted spies. So they pretty much had eyes on us 24/7, no matter where we went. And and we didn't know it at the time. We found out, a year later that this guy was actually an asset. We had our suspicions. I mean, all the raids we were doing were compromised. It was super frustrating. And it's like some of the times you see, like in the movies, right? You hit a place, and we'd go in, and there'd be like a cup of coffee there, like still steaming, like the typical shit, food on the half-eaten food, and like there's nobody here. Obviously it got compromised, so it was very frustrating. The corruption was systemic throughout the Colombian security forces, and it really complicated what we were trying to do.
And so, I mean, dealing with this compromise that you didn't even know that you had initially, how do you start making progress on this case? I mean, it sounds like an uphill battle, to say the least.
It was an extremely uphill battle. Over time, like I go back to what the ambassador told us, right? We had to pretty much violate every order that the ambassador gave us, and even DEA. We had to start going off base. We had to eventually we got safe houses in the city. We were doing unilateral surveillance. We were doing pretty much everything unilaterally. And then once we got the information, then we pretty much were lying as like how we got it. We're saying we need to do an operation here. So it took us a year pretty much on the ground to finally start to figure out how to circumvent the corruption there. And once we got Jorge Salcedo, who was, he was the head of security for the Cali Cartel, we were able to recruit him as an asset, and he laid the groundwork about everything. And that's how we found out about the corrupt captain, some of the other corrupt people within the security forces, and that's when we really, really had to modify our MO on what we were doing. And we were, like I said, we were basically operating unilaterally.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like at the end of the day, you had to get on the ground and do cop shit. Like, there's no getting around it.
We, toward the end, some of the operations we were doing, we were meeting with Salcedo. We were doing our own unilateral surveillance. We were planning, operations, how we were going to get to the buildings. Like, and the last one we did was really, it's out of a movie. We had to insert into like a flood control channel. We had to, come down a mountain. It was really, it was tough terrain. And but we did all this, and then we'd have to pretty much lie to the prosecutors about what we were doing. We couldn't tell them what we were raiding. We tell them, well, we'll let you know when we get there. We could only brief the head of the Colombian National Police and like the Attorney General on who the target was. We never told them the locations. It was, I mean, you talk about what's the word I'm looking for? You talk about the compartmentalization, of information and like need to know. We're foreigners in the country, and we're having to go through all this stuff where we can't even tell, the main people that we're working with what we're doing, where we're going, how we're going to get there. We're just, meet us here, get in the truck, follow us, and we'll lead you to where we're going. And that's no exaggeration. I mean, that's exactly how we were doing things toward the end, just to combat the corruption.
Do you want to lay out that you mentioned one of the later raids that was you went into a flight controlled airspace, and I mean, do you want to tell us a little bit more about how that transpired?
The coming down the mountain one?
Yeah.
So this is actually the operation where, well, let me backtrack a little just to give you like to lay the groundwork. So after we got Salcedo, again, he was the head of security for the Cali Cartel. We did a raid in July of '95 on an apartment, and there's a whole backstory to it, but I'll keep it as brief as I can.
No, it's okay. You have as much time as you want.
Yeah. So we were able to identify the building by doing surveillance up from the mountains and seeing which lights went off last, because as we talked about, like in the pre-interview, Miguel used to stay up until 4:30 in the morning talking with European crime families, mafia bosses, the Russian mob. And so we were able to pinpoint the apartment, and we did a raid the next day, and we were in the apartment basically for probably pretty darn close to 12 hours. And we were looking for hidden compartments. We knew he was there. The source told us he was there. All the signs, everything that we had gathered ahead of time in our recon and our surveillance, indicated he was there. You know, his assistant was there. He had like a 25 line telephone switching station, which would route calls from anywhere, and you couldn't trace it. It would come back to like a place downtown when he was, 15 miles away. So everything, we found. We actually found, again, talking about the corruption. We found the license plate of our car in the desk, and it said in Spanish. It said blue Toyota Land Cruiser, had the license plate, and it said the car that carries the gringos, which was us, which was which was me and my partner. So at one point, and they show this very well in Narcos season 3, we're able to locate a desk, and inside the desk is a hidden compartment. And we're knocking on the desk and like looking for latches and thinking, wait, how could there be a hidden compartment? It was a big desk, but how can there be a hidden compartment here? So one of the agents we were with, Jerry Salomon, he picks the desk up and it crashes onto the floor and it breaks apart. And in the back, there's 3 briefcases we find full of documents, like fucking explosive documents with corruption. And in the briefcases, ultimately, there's a list of, check this shit out, 2,800 names of corrupt officials, police, military, judges, governors, journalists,
The
mayors,
Rosetta
anybody.
Stone. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. It was the the Pandora's box too. So we find that, and the captain. Now this is a year later, or I'm telling you now, when we first got there, the captain is like, he's nosing around and he keeps following us and he's looking at us, and we're able to pinpoint where we think there's a hidden compartment. And let me tell you what, you could see that like the architects who built these compartments like into walls, they're called caletas, these rooms, they're amazing. Some of them I could still be there 30 years later and you wouldn't be able to find them.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like you said, it's coletas, it's called that. Like how are they concealed and how do you open them up?
Well, I'll tell you, the raid where we actually got them coming down the mountain, there was, so you can picture this, and I wish I had a photo of it, and I do somewhere, but so imagine going into the master bedroom of your house, right? And in the master bedroom, you have like built-in wall, built-in cabinetry, right? Where you would have, hangers, you would have dresser drawers and stuff, to put your socks, underwear, shorts, whatever. So in this particular case, they would remove, and they had the one dresser had 4 cabinets on each side, so 8 total. They would pull the 4 drawers out, and they're like the big Mosler safe cap, so they were like about this deep. And in the back was a door, and a big concrete door, 8 inches thick, and it would swing open, and it went into a room. And the room was, it couldn't have been more than like 3 or 4 feet by 3 or 4 feet. It was small, but they had it piped in, like the air conditioning was coming in. So it was basically a room for him to go and hide. So when he would get in this vault or this caleta, there were 4 like steel horizontal bars that would close and kind of lock him from the inside. But he can open them from the inside. So once that door was closed, then they would put those dresser drawers back in. So when you walked into the bedroom, all you would see was like a dresser. You wouldn't have, unless you had advanced intel, there was no way that you would know there was any kind of hidden compartment or secret room back there. So, like I said, I could have been there till this day, 30 years later, and you never find it. So, and we'll jump ahead. We'll get back to this on how we actually caught him that day. But so we finally get word after literally like 11 hours in there that day. We get word that the hiding spot in this apartment, a different apartment, is in the bathroom. So we're like, how could it be in the bathroom? And there were like 4 or 5 bathrooms in this apartment. So, we're like knocking on walls, we're doing everything. So finally I open the sink, the cabinet door to the sink, and it hits the toilet. And, and we're so like exhausted. Remember, now, again, this is where you're underground, we're working, and I kid you not, and I outline it in the book very well. 18, 20 hours a day. We got no sleep. We're up for days in a row. We're exhausted. So I'm thinking like, man, look at this like shoddy construction. How can they build something where it hits the toilet? It's just horrible. So finally I start thinking, you know what? It's probably because they had to modify the wall to build the compartment. So we're finally able to locate where we think the compartment is, and it was there. But the captain, the corrupt captain, he was talking to the cartel while we were there, kind of updating them on what we were doing. We found the documents, so they had a pretty good read on what we were doing, but we didn't know that at the time. And as we start drilling holes into the wall, we find a void. Ruben Prieto, one of the other agents there, gets a sledgehammer. He starts knocking the wall down. We're like, dude, we got him. We're like high-fiving, and then you can't make this up. The prosecutor basically bursts into the bathroom and tells us that we are conducting a unilateral operation, violating Colombian law. We're damaging property. And he basically arrests us, shuts the raid down, and we're inches away, probably another minute or two, we would have had him. Shuts the raid down, goes to the front door, locks the door, puts the keys in his pocket, takes out his typewriter, and starts typing up a complaint against the four of us, the four agents that were there, and basically shuts the raid down. We leave. There's a lot of other details, but check this out. So as we're at the airport waiting to go back to Bogota, we're thinking like, our informant's dead. We're probably we got arrested. The ambassador's probably going to throw us out of the country. We're screwed. We get word that they're going to try a rescue operation to get Miguel out of the compartment, out of the caleta. So make a long story short, the corrupt captain is able to go back into the apartment. They kind of, destroy the caleta. Miguel gets out, the head of the Cali Cartel, and he basically, the captain, walks him down the steps into the garage, puts him in the trunk of the car, and drives him away.
Unreal.
So that's how we missed him the first time.
Unreal. And so that's year one in Colombia. Holy shit, man. And so what happens next? What's the next step for you guys?
Oh, I mean, we go back to Bogota. The ambassador has a tirade. He threatens to throw us out of the country, and then he says, which caught us by surprise. He says, "Well, you're lucky that the police found what they did, or you guys would have been gone. You'd have been on the first flight back to Miami." And that's when we found out about the documents and the 2,800 corrupt officials. We learned that the compartment was broken into, and Miguel was extracted. But we didn't learn exactly how that happened until days later, a week later, until we were able to get back in touch with our asset and go to Cali, and we finally figured out what was going on. But yeah, so that was the level of corruption that we were dealing with. And anytime we left the police base, not anytime, but often when we left the base to do our stuff, we were followed by the Cali Cartel. They were surveilling us all the time. In our safe houses too, we were always constantly worried that, they were going to find out where we were and, maybe try to do something against us. Even though we thought it was unlikely, you're always, have that in the back of your head. And at the time, there were no Americans in Cali, right? So me and my partner, right, we can't blend in. We're 6'2". It's anytime that anybody saw us anywhere, they immediately associated us to DEA or CIA. And if you were a poor, British backpacker who was in Colombia at the time and they saw you, they associated them with, DEA or CIA because there was no American presence in Cali. So it was at times like overwhelming, the stress, just, operating in that environment, almost like behind the Berlin Wall, that it was, all eyes were on you no matter where you went and what you did.
So what was the next step for you guys? I mean, this is it's a major setback. You missed the guy because of corruption within the ranks, and then the ambassador chews your ass too. I mean, how do you like recover from that and continue the investigation?
Well, to make matters worse, like we said, we didn't hear from our asset for several days. So we think he's dead,
Right.
or likely being tortured or what. So we're thinking the worst, obviously. And there's a couple details I won't get into, but I have them in the book because it's a big spoiler if I bring it out
Okay.
now. But um, so we're able to go back to Cali. We're able to get to back with Salcedo, and he tells us, he goes, look, I'm one of the prime suspects. A lot of the people around Miguel don't trust me. They think it's me. Although Miguel was 100% thought it wasn't him. So he still had Miguel's kind of blessing, but he was on thin ice. So we're able to ultimately pinpoint where he's at to two buildings, and this is pretty funny story, I'll tell you. Um, so we're surveilling the buildings at night. We're about a half a mile away, about 1,000 meters away, and there's a statue. There's a very famous statue in Cali where we're at. It's like a park where at night people gather, they drink beer, they have food, and you can watch the burning sugar cane in the distance and watch the lights. So and it was at night too, and we always had hats and stuff on. So we're doing surveillance there, and we had a bunch of other intel to indicate it was one of these two buildings. So we're watching the lights again to see which one goes off last. And one of the little tidbits of information we got was from Salcedo was that there were two black maids, two Afro-Colombian maids that he had imported after the raid. He got rid of his assistant. He got rid of the maids. He brought a new staff in. So it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm looking through my binoculars, and a light comes on, and then I see these two maids working in the kitchen. And Miguel was hypoglycemic, so he had to eat certain foods at certain times. And I'm like, it looks like they're cooking or washing dishes. I go, that's the apartment. That's got to be, because we had a bunch of other intel that confirmed it. So my partner Dave he has these special KGB binoculars he got, and I used to give him shit about them all the time because I said, Dave, those things are worthless. They're a piece of shit. He got them out of some spy catalog. And he's like, I can't see anything with these. Are you sure it's the maze? I'm like, I'm positive. I'm looking at him. That's the place. And he's trying to adjust his little James Bond glasses, and so I'm like, that's it. This is it. We got to start planning the raid. So when we left that night, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. We left. They go, hey Dave, let me see your super spy spec KGB binoculars you got out of the spy catalog. So he gives them to me, and I take them and I wind up and I throw them as hard as I could down this hill, and they just tumble into the abyss. And he's like, my KGB binoculars. I go, Dave, that's where they belong. You're a piece of shit. You can use them. Get your DEA binoculars back. So that's how we ended up finding that apartment. And then we planned a raid. So me and Dave, we go out, we start reconning the area. We had intel on from the asset to come down this drainage ditch and through the mountain. But we check it out, and it's like, man, this is it's a high risk operation coming down that mountain in pitch black. It was a pretty gnarly terrain. But yeah, we did it all on our own. The Colombian, they had no idea what we were doing, what we were surveilling. We planned out a meeting spot. Nobody knew about it. We had our route of approach. Nobody knew except us two. We had our insertion point. Nobody knew. We had the canal. So we basically planned everything, and then we had to, brief the head of the Colombian National Police, General Serrano, who was great. And so check this out. So because of the corruption, we have to tell him, because he always liked to come on the operation afterwards to get his photo taken with the guy, right? I mean, he's the head of the Colombian National Police, and
Right.
hey, he was very good at marketing and selling the police story. So he wanted to be there like he had been when we arrested Gilberto. So we have to tell him, look, you can't come to Cali for the operation because the Cali Cartel is monitoring your movements, and if you come to Cali, they're going to know we're doing an operation. But the real reason is because his pilot was corrupt. And anytime Serrano was coming to Cali, the pilot would call the Cali Cartel and go, "Hey, Serrano's coming." So they knew something was going on.
Right.
So we had to basically tell him, "Hey, you got to stay in Bogota." And you know what? His thing was like, "Hey, I completely understand. Don't worry, I'll come afterwards." So so we had to take that precaution. We had a Feistl, like a Colombian prosecutor with the warrant, that we didn't tell her where we were going or who the target was. We said, "We'll tell you when we get there." Same thing. And then we had to brief the attorney general, and we said, "Look, the only way we're going to get this guy because of the apartments is we got to get permission, like a no-knock warrant. We got to knock the door down," which they didn't do in Colombia because, especially with the Cali Cartel, these guys lived in a lot of mansions and these pricey places. They didn't want to damage, like what we were doing. They didn't want to damage property. You know, we had already been arrested once, so we got permission to knock the door down. So ultimately, we get the team, we get the group, we take this really circuitous route through the city. We go to the insertion point. We get into this flood canal. You know, the prosecutor, it was a female. She breaks her heel. You know, people are falling behind. And people can't get down the mountain. It's like spiraling out of control real quick because, like I said, it was a pretty rough terrain. So ultimately, we end up hitting the building with hitting the head of the Cali Cartel with 6 people.
How many did you start out with?
Probably 30 to 40.
Wow.
6 people, 2 of which are Americans, right? So, so we hit the place, we knocked the door down, and they're the equivalent of like the Navy SEAL. They were like the special commandos for the Navy. Going back to the story now with the 4 drawers. Yeah, we hit the place. We're scattered. The apartment was about 4,000 square feet. It was massive. He goes into the bedroom, and as this Miguel Rodriguez, the head of the Cali Cartel, is stepping foot into that compartment to close the door, this guy grabs him and basically pulls him out of the caleta, out of the secret compartment, and walks him back to where me and Jerry were there at the time, and kind of plants him right in front of us. And we look back and we said, like, you know what, had we not got that permission to knock the door down, and we had to, and the reason why we had to come down the mountain was because
they'd catch you on the road. The scouts would see you.
Right, because they had perimeter security on the roads, like 2 or 3 separate rings of security. And these cartel guys, the Cali guys, they lived on like a road that was always one way in and one way out and backed up to the mountain. So in their mind, the only way to get there was down this one-way street coming in, and they had their rings of security. So there's no way you can get anywhere near there with troop transport trucks. So we decided, hey, we have to come down that mountain, and that was the only way to get there, and we did. But had we not knocked the door down, and it took us another minute or 2 to get in, we would have never found them.
That's pretty unreal. So you snatched that dude up, and how does that all go down? I mean, with the prosecutor that broke her heel and all this other stuff that happened in the interlude, the infiltration process. How does it kind of play out politically?
Well, if it didn't work, probably bad. It probably would have ended bad for us. But she didn't show up until probably 15 or 20 minutes after we had arrested him, because it took her that long because people were helping her, and again, it's pitch black.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like any fault of hers, and we had worked with her before, and she was a warrior, man. She was as good as they came, but she had no idea what she was in for that night, right?
This was like a military operation, yeah.
It's exactly what it was. And we told her we were like going to do chemical inspections somewhere. So she comes all decked out. Check it out. She has this white. It wasn't white for long because she felt it was mud and dirt. White jumpsuit on, like red high heel shoes, and like a nice like silk blouse. Very professional. She just a prosecutor. And man, when she found out that in that drainage ditch, and it was muddy and it was wet and it was dark and she was falling, and even some of the other the cops couldn't make it either. But yeah, she was pissed. But so I always said I don't know whether she was more happy that Miguel was arrested or that she made it to like solid ground there in the apartment. So, but yeah, I mean, in the end, everybody was happy. The head of the Cali Cartel was arrested. He was the third out of the fourth to fall. So, the cartel was on its heels. The Colombian National Police were making progress. They were making headlines nationally for, fighting the war on drugs and arresting the kingpin. So, yeah, it worked out fine. But like you brought up a good point. Had it not worked, yeah, we probably would have been in some deep shit.
And how did number 4 get captured?
The fourth guy surrendered.
Gotcha.
The Miguel's brother Gilberto we arrested in June of '95. Miguel in July, Jose Santa Cruz was arrested. And there's a lot of backstory on this one too. He was arrested at a restaurant in Bogota. Miguel was arrested in August '95, and then Pacho Herrera, the fourth horseman of the cartel, was arrested or surrendered in September of '96. So, yeah, it took us, from the time we stepped foot in Colombia the first time until we left, it was, just a couple months shy of 3 years that we were, at this.
Wow. But at the same, I mean, it sounds like you spent quite a bit more time in Colombia after that.
Yeah, I did two more tours down there. I was there from '99 to 2002, which was the Millennium operation.
Yep.
And then I went back in 2004 until 2010. So in total, it was just over 12 years of total time on the ground in Colombia.
Throughout your time in Colombia and even back to Miami, I mean, do you have any thoughts about the general idea or concept of like the war on drugs and what that means politically, socially? What did you kind of come away from that experience with?
Well, I mean, I always look at it as, and everybody has their own opinions on whether drugs should be legalized or not.
Sure.
And the war on drugs, I've heard, so many times it's an abject failure. But, my attitude or philosophy or however you want to describe it always was, you look what's happening. Just take today, for example. Today meeting, 2024. You have 100,000 people dying of fentanyl a year. You have constant, drug overdoses. You have a homeless crisis. And I always tell people, imagine if like DEA or local police or whoever you want to throw into this equation, if they weren't out there investigating, drug trafficking and going after these drug dealers and drug traffickers, there would be complete anarchy.
Yeah.
The number of overdose deaths, if there wasn't any kind of enforcement, would skyrocket. The healthcare system would be overwhelmed, and you would have a lot of, crime, people trying to fuel their crime would go through the roof. So, that's what I always, I used to tell these congressional delegations and stuff that came to Colombia, do you guys really think you're making an impact? Well, shit. Well, what if we weren't here? Imagine the impact that would be going on. So that's how I always like to describe it. Are we winning? I don't know. I don't know if you could ever win that war, but at least you're doing something to try to address the problem.
Yeah. I think like back when I was a kid in the 1990s, the idea that like if you do drugs once you're going to die was kind of like propaganda. But today, the way that drugs are being laced with fentanyl, it's kind of true. Like you could do something thinking you're doing one drug, and the reality is it's laced with fentanyl and you're going to die.
Exactly. And what's the motto now? One pill can kill.
Yeah.
That's what's being marketed out there. And that's not an exaggeration because it's happening 100,000 times a year to mainly, young people. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't do drugs just because it is illegal, right? People want to try to obey the law. You apply for jobs, you have to take polygraph tests, you have to take urinalysis. So if you're going to, and look at some of the experiments that have gone on, in Portland or Seattle, where they've legalized, you know, small quantity of personal use drugs. It's a disaster. So
Right.
if you did that across the board and just, like people want to legalize, marijuana or cocaine, it would be, I don't know, in my opinion, again, it's my opinion from being in law enforcement, it would be a disaster.
What do you think? I mean, it's interesting because for people who are younger who don't remember the war on drugs, it was every bit as in the public's consciousness like the global war on terror was during its time. What are like some of the things that you thought the U.S. did right and some of the things you thought the U.S. did wrong in hindsight?
In the war on drugs?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll probably get a lot of grief over this one, but I think, some of the minimum mandatory sentencing, I thought, if you arrested, people with a certain amount of drugs, they got a certain amount of time, right? That's what they call the minimum mandatory sentences. So I think back in the day, I can't remember, I'm going to get it wrong, but like over 5 kilos of cocaine was like a minimum mandatory 10 or 15 years in prison. So you were getting people locked up and they were doing that time. And there was, if you got 15 years in federal prison at the time, minimum mandatory sentence, you were doing 12 and a half, maybe with gain time, a year or 52 days a year, whatever it was, earned. But so you were spending a significant amount of time in prison. But again, you have all kind of people saying it's disproportionate and the targeted minorities and so on and so forth. But it definitely had an impact because people knew if I get arrested with 1 kilo, or I'm doing this amount of time. If I get 5 kilos, I'm doing this amount of time. Or if I get caught with 5,000 kilos on a load, I'm buried.
The problem with mandatory minimum sentencing, in my opinion, again, was that you have that, which someone gets caught with 5 or 10 keys,
right?
You
it's
need to
clear
go to jail.
what their intent is.
But then you'll have a guy who gets caught shoplifting and he has a gram of marijuana in his pocket and he's going to jail for 20 years.
Yeah, but that's not accurate because the threshold for marijuana it was more than that. I mean, it was I don't even know.
Was it on like a third offense though?
Well, they had that 3 strikes.
They had those 3 strikes.
Yeah.
So if you had 3 convictions, you got hammered for sure.
Yeah.
But extradition, I think, was another big win for the government. Getting extradition out of Colombia. I mean, Pablo Escobar said it best. Better a tomb in Colombia than a jail cell in the U.S. And And he went to war with the Colombian government on 2 occasions that lasted years, where he was, he killed the minister of justice.
Brought down an airliner.
They brought down the Avianca flight. They blew up the DAS building. They assassinated Luis Carlos Galán in '89, who was a presidential candidate. They killed Guillermo Cano, the main editor of the Colombian newspaper, because all these people were speaking out for extradition. That's how terrified that they were of extradition. And look at Carlos Later, one of the Medellin cartel guys, going back to the movie Blow, who was Diego Delgado in the movie. He got extradited to Colombia. From Colombia, and he initially got. I think he got released recently, but these guys did multiple years, 30 plus years. So. I thought that was a big win too. And you look at Chapo Guzman, right? The guy is in a Mexican prison and tunnels his way out. He escapes. I can guarantee you he's not tunneling his way out of the correctional facility in the United States. So you're getting those guys off the street, and you're getting them off the street for quite a long time if they get extradited back to the States. So that's another I think big win for U.S.
So tell us about your last trip down to Colombia. It sounds like it was a bit of now you're more in a leadership and managerial type of role.
Yeah. So The last time I went down in 2004, I was the assistant regional director for the Andean region, which encompassed, Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Peru. And, you know, for my second time there until then, we started targeting the North Valley Cartel, which, was one of the main cartels that came up after we took down Cali. And, so we were targeting them. And, and by that time I had a pretty good background on, who the players were, obviously, for spending that much time there. And I had a lot of sources and a lot of assets that were still on the ground. And a lot of the cops that we worked with back then, now they all came into leadership positions. They were, General Naranjo, who I work with as a mate, he was the head of the Colombian National Police. Some of the other cops we worked with after Naranjo, they came to be the Colombian National Police, the head of the entire police. So we had a lot of good contacts. We were able to get a lot done just because of the personal relationships and, and the dedication to that the Colombian National Police had going after, a lot of these cartels. And, and rightfully so. I mean, I bash Colombian security forces a lot because of the corruption, but you also have to point out on the other side that there were a lot of very hardworking,
Brave,
honest Colombian, brave officials that wanted to do the right thing. And no one has really sacrificed more than the people of Colombia and Colombian security forces in the war on drugs, with thousands killed, fighting drug trafficking, terrorism, and stuff. So I don't want people to think that I'm sitting here always bashing Colombia. I bash them when they deserve it, but you got to give them credit when they deserve credit. And they had a lot of good, hardworking cops that we work with that we got a lot of stuff done with. So I just want to make sure I pointed that out.
Yeah, if our judges, politicians, and police forces, and even journalists were exposed to the same type of threats that they were in Colombia, I mean, we probably have 20% of the judges that we have now. Like, not a lot of people would step up for that.
Yep. And the money too.
Yeah.
Here's another little good anecdotal story too, right? Is that when we first got to Colombia, we started working with the military search block, and a lot of the main people that had access to, confidential information, they were all polygraphs, right? So, and then we ended up having these vetted units, these polygraphed vetted units, a little bit later on. But again, when we got there, do you think that these polygraphed units posed a problem to the cartel? Yes and no.
No.
But here's how they got around that, right? So what they would do is they knew exactly when these guys were getting polygraphed. So the day after they passed the polygraph, the day after they were proven to be honest, right? The cartel would go up to all of them with a huge bag of money and say, hey, now's your time to get on the payroll. You're not going to be polygraphed for another 12 to 18 months. So, and what's the worst thing? You fail a polygraph, you just get out of the unit. But in the meantime, you'll make a lot of money. So they would approach those guys the next day. Some would say yes, some would say no. But the ones that said yes, they had their spies, and they were loyal. And one of the military sergeants that worked for the colonel, that's exactly what happened with him. And he was the key. Every time we did something or the military did something, it was compromised because of that guy, because he took the money.
Yeah. Well, personally, I don't think that a polygraph does anything. I don't find polygraphs to be reliable at all. But I know that's a good, it's a good tool. It's a good psychological ploy for the interviewer. But
yeah, but I mean, you have to do the best you can to try to get the most honest people that you can into the unit. So, that's what they would do. I mean, and here's the other thing too, is that, it only took one person, right? So if you were working with the most elite group, right, in Colombia, which we had, the military and the police, these elite groups, these, special operations groups. It only took one person who had access to that information to completely subvert or sabotage a case, right? Because if you had 10 or 15 or 20, you name your number, 30 people in that group, and one person had that information that was corrupt,
Yeah.
man, it just completely, sabotaged anything that you were working on, because that person would just, tell somebody. And that was the other thing too, is that, somewhere, even though there were that many honest and hardworking people, somewhere along the line in the chain, because of the bureaucracy, you had to tell somebody something, and you never know who you were telling it to. It could have been somebody above you. It could have been an officer, a general, a colonel, anybody, and that person could be corrupt. But now he's
Yeah.
in the flow of the information. So it was very frustrating and difficult to operate in that environment at the time.
Out of curiosity, because like when we look at in the United States, when we look at some of the counter espionage cases, it's surprising how little the spies are paid. Right? Sometimes maybe a 50 or 100 or whatever, but it's not like life changing money. It's always surprising to me. When you saw that in Colombia, was it just like a little bit more than they were making? Was it like setting them up for the next 10 years? Like, what was the money situation like?
Well, it depended on, who you were, what rank you were, and what kind of access to information that you had.
Uh-huh.
So if you were a high level officer, a general, and had access to like really good information about what DEA was doing, you were making pretty decent money. I'll give you an example. The captain remember I told you he went in afterwards, took Miguel Rodriguez out of the compartment, walked him down the steps, put him in the trunk of the car, and drove him away. He was, I think, at the time getting, and again, this is 1995, so do the work for, adjusted for inflation and whatnot, but he was getting $1,000 a month. And after he got Miguel out of that apartment, he got, I think he got up almost $50,000 like as a bonus. So whether it was 20 grand, 30 grand, 50 grand in Colombia back in the day, 30 years ago, that's a lot of money.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot more than 50 or 100 grand in the U.S. on when they're already making close to that as their salary.
And 50 grand back then is probably, especially in Colombia, with the way things are, not necessarily in the U.S., but 50,000 back then is probably equivalent to like 2, 3, 4, 500,000 today in Colombia. You know what I mean? So it was pretty good money. And again, the higher you were and the more access to information you had, you might have got a little more. And if you did something that resulted that made the cartel leaders happy, then you got your bonus, your periodic bonuses.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit then about kind of the tail end of your career after the third Colombia trip, winding down, retiring, and how retirement has been suiting you.
So after I left Colombia for the last time, again after 12 plus years in 2010, I was transferred to Phoenix. I was an assistant special agent in charge here, and I retired from DEA in January of 2014. I went to work at JP Morgan at the bank for a while in the private bank, asset management, and the anti-money laundering and global financial crime section for a couple of years. And then, Narcos came about. And then, so I consulted on Narcos season 3 for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Did some other, been in a couple different documentaries on Netflix, Narco Wars on National Geographic.
Tell us how all of that came about, like what the process was like working with Narcos and like how they brought you on.
Well, when Narcos initially started in, I think, 2015, and it focused on Pablo Escobar, the Medellin cartel, and with DEA agents, Steve Murphy and Javier Pena. So when they started, I think that initially was, and I could be wrong here, but I think they only initially planned on doing like one season with that, and then it just became so like enormously popular that they spun it off into season 2, and then that was a massive hit. So Netflix and the Narcos creators are like, hey man, let's just keep this thing rolling. Let's go. And so the next logical step in the progression was obviously was the Cali Cartel. So when they got to, thinking about doing Cali, they asked Steve and Javier, like, hey, who are the DEA guys that we should talk to regarding the Cali Cartel? So they mentioned my name, and I had done an NPR radio interview. There's an NPR show called This American Life with Ira Glass. Pretty good show where they have a lot of different stuff on there. And I did it with the author of At the Devil's Table, which is where they got a lot of the information from Narcos season 3. It's kind of a story about Salcedo's life, but obviously we play a pretty big part in that toward the end. Working with him and taking the cartel down. So. They heard that interview, and coupled with Steve and Javier's recommendation, they called me up, and I went out to California and met with them and sat down for several days and kind of went over the whole story and what happened, and so they ended up writing up that story, and I served as a consultant on the show for that, and then I kind of parlayed that into. I did like a 6-episode show with the Discovery Channel called Finding Escobar's Millions, where we went down into Colombia and kind of tore up the country looking for Pablo Escobar's buried money and treasure, although we didn't find anything. But and then a couple documentaries here and there that Drug Lords on Netflix, Narco Wars. There's another one coming out next month called The German Cocaine Cowboy, which kind of was a 4-episode show that focuses on this German national who was working with the Cali Cartel and was their kind of main point of contact over in Germany. So he's kind of like a career criminal that they made a show about. So just doing that, working on I'm writing a book right now called the working title right now is called After Escobar, taking down the notorious Cali Godfathers and the biggest drug cartel in history. So that's taken up a lot of my time over the last year and a half or so. And, doing some podcasts, hanging out with guys like you and,
That's awesome.
talking about, the Cali Cartel and some stuff.
The book After Escobar is going to be up for pre-order in January?
That's the scheduled timeline as of right now. They said
gotcha.
Pre-order in more or less January was the time frame that I was told by the publisher, and they're going to try to get it out in time for the summer 2025.
Do we have any questions for
let's see here.
Chris? And Chris, just before we get into the questions, what did you think about the whole Narcos experience and being a character on that show? When you watched it, what did you think of it?
So, true story. I didn't watch it initially until a year later. I didn't see it when it came out. I saw the first episode, obviously, when I went to the premieres in Colombia, New York, but I had never watched the series, and people didn't really believe me. And I was like, well, I know the story. I kind of know what's going to happen, and I read some of the scripts, so finally I got around to watching it, but. Let me tell you what, great experience working with Netflix and the creators of Narcos. Those guys, top shelf. You can tell by the product that they put out. Extremely well done. The show was very well done. Didn't really spare a lot of expense. And when they wanted to do something, they went all out, and it didn't really matter how much it cost. They were just going to say, hey, we're going to do it this way. We're going to do it right and get it out there. So, it was great dealing with the writers, the Netflix executive staff, the producers, the directors. I was down on set for a while in Cali when we filmed some of the sugarcane field scenes,
cool.
which
it was
were
shot on location.
Yeah. And we went to the actual spot where we met Salcedo.
Wow.
Which was a good an hour outside of Cali. A lot of the apartments where some of the stuff was filmed in were actual, properties owned by the Cali Cartel. So it was great. The actors were all, again, top-notch guys, just a pleasure to be around. And so for me, that was a great experience. And that's when I said, you know what, I can kind of get used to this consulting on TV and movie shows like this because I'll tell you what, there was a lot of fun, and especially when they do it right. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? When they do it right and they spend the money and they pay attention to detail, it was just really enjoyable. But when I finally did watch it, I was impressed at how good of a job that they really did. Not that I had any doubt they wouldn't, but it was like I go, man, that's really well done.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Questions for
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you a question how I know that for maybe the last 10 or 15 years, they've said that some of these cartels are moving into like Arizona and places like that. How does law enforcement manage to deal with that? And is there a way of keeping them from gaining a real foothold?
So it's a good question, but per se, like you notice that there are no like major cartels with drug kingpins that operate in the States.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There aren't any. They're in Mexico. They're in a lot of different countries, and take one guess. I mean, there's several reasons, but what do you think is one of the main reasons why that doesn't happen here?
law enforcement pressure.
That and the corruption, right? You don't have the corruption like you do in some of these other countries,
Right.
right? The Russian
Judges
the
that
Russian
are on
mafia.
the take.
Yeah.
So those cartels, they can't exist here in the United States like that because law enforcement here at every level is, extremely well trained. They have the resources, and now that's to say there's criminal gangs or groups or whatever, but not like the level that there are in these other. Look at Mexico. These guys have been on the run from from the 70s.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons. But yeah, just the continual pressure, the expertise of law enforcement that you're not going to see big major cartels operating in the U.S. like you see in other countries.
Yeah. They have to use people like Hell's Angel or, some of these motorcycle groups or gangs or whatever to distribute.
Right, and they're not nearly at the level that
Right.
you're looking at some of these Colombian and Mexican or even Russian, cartels are.
Right.
Or the Italian mafia too. Like, he's not going to have that here.
Right. That makes sense. M. Corbin, thank you very much. Who do you think had better surveillance, Cali or the KGB?
Well, they were called the Cali KGB for just that reason. I think the better surveillance, I would say, obviously the KGB, the Russian KGB. But the reason they were called the Cali KGB too is that not only were they really good at surveillance and wiretapping, is that they had the ability to wiretap like 400 telephones a month. I mean, it was incredible.
Wow.
They had hooks at the phone company. They were able to do that. Their surveillance network was really good. But the other thing I was going to say is that they were also called the Cali GB because what they did is they blackmailed a lot of high-level, high-profile, politicians, military figures, or whatever. Is that the Cali Cartel, for the most part, they didn't want to go after or kill law enforcement or DEA agents. They saw what happened with Pablo Escobar, how they hunted him down like an animal and killed him, and Cali didn't want any part of that. So their MO was approach you for a bribe, right? That was the Cali Cartel's weapon of choice, was the bribe.
Uh-huh.
Medellin's was, threats, intimidation, murder, extortion, kidnapping. So they'd offer you a bribe. If you didn't take the bribe, they try to discredit you, right? And how they discredit you is they try to get compromising information on you, just like the KGB.
Right.
And they would use that to blackmail you to kind of get their way. And if you were a lower profile person, if that didn't work, then obviously they would kill you. They'd eliminate you and throw you in the river. But if you were more high profile, they wouldn't do that because they didn't want the pressure. But that's why they were called more so the Cali KGB, was because of all of those things in addition to the blackmail.
Was that an issue for Americans, whether it was DEA or military or whatever, going down there? Obviously a lot of very attractive women, things like that, that if guys were not, very cautious and acting appropriately, that they could set themselves up.
Right. Of course, but absolutely. And right? The form of like discrediting I talked about, number two on the list, those two DEA agents that had their photo taken,
Yeah.
right? They
Yeah.
took the photo, they brought it in, they discredited them by saying, hey, we knew they were DEA, they can't go to Cali anymore. Mission
Yeah.
accomplished, right? They didn't have
Yeah.
to resort to violence.
Right.
They,
Right.
they discredited them. And here's a real quick story, too. Talk about the compromise and the blackmail. Our first contact when we got to Cali, my partner, me and Dave, was a guy by the name of Colonel Velasquez. Very honest, very hardworking, loved working with the guy. He was really one of the guys who's an unsung hero going after the Cali Cartel because a lot of the stuff he did early on paved the way to what happened later. And he was using an informant, a female informant, and he ended up having like an affair with her, and the Cali Cartel found out.
Yeah.
So they approached her and basically said, "Hey, you work with us, or you're going to be, like sleeping with the fishes," as they said in The
I
Godfather.
remember this. This came out in the Colombian newspapers.
It was all over the news. So what they did is they got her to work for him. She lured him to and I mean they had done it in the past, so it was pretty easy. They went to a nightclub, kind of like a bar. Cali Cartel was there because they set it up. They photographed him with the girl. She took him back to a motel, one of those like the Bates Motel with the walls. You drive your car in, you close the gate, one of the love motels. They had it wired up. Check it out, man. They had it wired up with video
Wow.
and audio.
Yep.
They recorded the romp there in the hotel room. And they sent him pictures and the video copy of the tape like 2 weeks later and basically said, hey,
You work for
do the
us.
pretty much, or pay the consequences. And I told this guy was a stand-up guy. He didn't do anything. He called his supervisors in Bogota and reported what happened. Right, so he kind of fell on the sword and said, "Hey, they tried to blackmail me. I'm not doing it. I admitted to this. I was wrong. I screwed up." So he stayed in his position.
Wow.
But then, like 2 months later, May, June, July, August, 3 months later, the cartel released the tape on the news, like national broadcast throughout the country to discredit him, right? There's your second thing. Try to go for the money? No, discredit too. So, yeah, that was what they did. Blackmail. They set the guy up. They recorded it. They videoed it and everything.
That's wild. Sorry.
So needless to say, let me jump in. So you can imagine. So if we were in Cali and some girl like walked up or even looked at us, we were like, we wouldn't even look at them because we were like, oh, I could just see what's going to happen here, So it was something that we certainly stayed away from while we were there.
Yeah. Tom Lennon, thank you very much. Love what you guys are doing. Raw, unfiltered. Thank you. And by the way, F the haters. Thank you, Tom. Do we have haters? I don't even know if we have haters.
The haters are pervasive. They're everywhere.
M. Corbin, thank you very much. How do you think the recent elections in Mexico are going to affect the trafficking issues in the States?
Well, I mean, the recent elections in the U.S. or in Mexico?
In Mexico.
Well, I mean, one, I think it depends on who gets in there on the Mexican side. And, two, I think it depends on who gets in here on the U.S. side too, right? Because I think if Trump gets in, I think he's going to be able to exert a lot of pressure on the Mexicans, not only like immigration and drug trafficking, a whole bunch of trade, all kind of stuff. So I think that it's going to depend on how much pressure the U.S. can exert on Mexico and whether or not Mexico wants to play ball. It's it's hard to say.
Do you, out of curiosity, do you think that the fentanyl issue, and a lot of it is created in China, do you think that is there because it's purely business, or do you think that there's any sort of just like create chaos ideology behind that?
I think it's both, for sure. Create instability in the West, in the U.S. and to make money because a lot of the precursor chemicals to make fentanyl are coming from China.
Yeah.
And they're going into Mexico, and they have the labs and everything there, and they're just mass producing it. I remember the days back in like the 80s or 90s where they produced like 100 grams of fentanyl for the entire year. You know what I mean? It was like this like super controlled and regulated substance, and now there's just like tons and tons of it being manufactured in Mexico. But yeah, I think it's both to create chaos and instability,
Yeah.
and to obviously there's look at the demand for it. The Chinese and the Mexicans are making billions of dollars off of the sale of chemicals and fentanyls.
Yeah.
There's I mean, like within Russia, there's like a pretty widespread conspiracy theory that the United States is trafficking drugs into Russia in order to weaken the state. And in China, they have their own experience, the opium wars, and that the Western world dumped all of this opium into China back in the old days, and so they feel like it's this reciprocity, right?
Well, if anybody's inundating Russia with drugs, it's the Colombian and Mexican cartels.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's America.
They're doing it, So
Yeah. Thanks, Scotchy. Thank you very much. My dad worked with a DEA agent in the Air Group in Miami who showed up to a stakeout dressed exactly like Sonny from Miami Vice. Was this common?
more common than you would think in the 80s. That was, I mean, Miami Vice, whether you like the show or not, did a lot in the cultural world, and it did a lot for Miami. It kind of put Miami on the map. I mean, after that series, even a couple of years later, South Beach exploded, and Miami has not looked back since then. But that whole fashion trend by Sonny Crockett, you would see people all the time, whether they were DEA agents or not, kind of wearing that outfit, the no socks. And I was certainly a proponent or child of that too. I never wore socks when I went to work, and I had the shoes, and I didn't necessarily have the Crockett clothing, but you would see that all the time in South Florida. Yeah. So yeah, it was pretty prevalent, and even some DEA guys wore it for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. Do we have anything on Patreon? Do you know? Okay.
Chris, thank you so much for talking to us and spending your Friday evening with us. Where can people find you if they're looking for you? I know your book is going to be available for pre-order in January after Escobar, and people can go and find it. But if anyone's interested in looking you up, where can they find you?
Well, we're going to have a website come up about the book here, probably in a few months. But I mean, just honestly, go to Google. I have a pretty big presence on the internet as far as the Cali Cartel, Narcos, and some of the documentaries and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff on there, a lot of information. I'm also on Instagram, LinkedIn, so I'm kind of easy to find there.
Awesome. Chris, thanks so much for talking to us and sharing your stories with us.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I had a good time talking to you guys. My only complaint is I wish I had a cigar and some rum there with you.
Next time when your book is published, you come through New York City, and we'll smoke stogies and we'll have some rum, and it'll be great.
That sounds like a plan. I'll certainly take you up on that. Thank you so much again for your time.
Who's coming up on Friday, D?
Jack
former
Bark.
KGB defector.
Yep, former KGB.
So we'll talk to all of you guys on Friday. Thank you for tuning in. Chris, thanks again. And we'll see all of you next week. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks.